I stood there silent, my hand still wrapped around the lemonade glass as the room erupted in awkward laughter. The reunion banner fluttered above the patio, bold and red, pretending this was a family worth celebrating. "My mother owns nothing," my son said, loud enough for the cousins to smirk, quiet enough to keep his hands clean. After co-signing his mortgage, after bailing out his debts, after raising him alone for 32 years, I was just the woman who gave him life, not value. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The rented banquet hall buzzed with overlapping conversations, the smell of pot roast and honeyed ham thick in the air. Kids chased each other between folding tables. A slideshow of old family photos flickered lazily on a projector screen, casting sepia-toned shadows across paper streamers that drooped slightly in the October humidity. Marjorie Benson stood near the buffet, carefully spooning baked beans beside her coleslaw, her cardigan sleeves rolled neatly to her elbows. The second she heard Daniel's voice lift above the chatter, something in her gut tensed. "She owns nothing," he said, loud enough to split through the room. The moment hung. A few relatives chuckled, the kind of laugh that didn't quite know where to land. One uncle looked down into his cup. A teenage niece blinked at her phone, then back up, confused. Karen, perched on a white folding chair in her crisp navy dress, lifted her wine glass with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well," she said, "not in any meaningful way." Marge froze mid-step, potato salad jiggling on her plate. She didn't look up. Not yet. Her fingers trembled slightly, betraying the rage pressing against her ribs. Irene saw it first. Seated across the room, Marge's cousin leaned forward slowly, her silver-gray curls barely brushing her shoulders. She narrowed her eyes at Daniel. Her jaw tightened. "Watch it," she muttered, mostly to herself. But Daniel wasn't watching anything but himself. He stood near the drinks table, a beer bottle swinging lazily from his hand, addressing a loose semicircle of second cousins and a pair of in-laws. "I mean, come on," he said. "That place is paid off, sure, but let's be honest. When people talk about the future of the Benson house, they're talking about me." Someone made a quiet, sound. Daniel shrugged theatrically. "Mom just holds it for now. You know, until she doesn't." He winked. Marge finally turned. She didn't say anything. She simply walked, slow and deliberate, toward an empty table near the corner. She set her plate down gently. Her hands were steady now, her spine perfectly straight. Across the room, Karen leaned toward her husband. "Maybe we should think about redoing the kitchen," she said under her breath. Not quiet enough. "All that old tile? It's so 1985. Daniel barked a laugh. "Please, the second it's in my name, I'll bring in contractors. Rip out all that sentimental junk." Marge didn't blink. A cousin walked by and paused beside her. "You okay, Marge?" "I'm fine, Robbie," she said softly. "Go get another plate before the meatballs are gone." He hesitated, glancing between her and Daniel, but nodded and moved along. Marge sat. Irene was beside her in a flash. "You hear that?" Irene hissed. "I did. And you're not going to. Not here." Marge picked up her fork. She stabbed a slice of cucumber, chewed it with quiet precision, then folded her napkin into her lap like they were sitting at a five-star restaurant instead of between plastic tablecloths and lukewarm casseroles. Irene leaned closer. "You want me to say something?" Marge shook her head. "He's already said enough." Across the room, Daniel lifted his bottle like he was giving a toast. "To keeping it in the family," he announced. Marge looked up then, just for a moment. Her eyes found his, and something cold and calculating flickered behind her soft expression. He didn't notice. He never did. "I should go check on the dessert table," Marge said quietly. She stood, brushing crumbs from her skirt. Irene watched her go. You're going to do something, she said aloud to no one in particular. I know that look. As Marge passed by the punch bowl, Karen caught her eye and smiled. That smug, sharp little smile that stung like lemon juice in a paper cut. Marge smiled back. Polite, distant, controlled. But her hand clutched her purse just a little tighter as she walked past the table of family members who'd laughed too hard. Back at her seat, Daniel raised an eyebrow. Guess she doesn't have much to say, huh? He took another swig of beer. What he didn't notice, what no one did, was that Marge didn't return to her seat. She was already slipping quietly toward the exit, her expression unreadable, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. She wasn't thinking about the reunion anymore. She was thinking about a locked cabinet, a dusty file folder, and a name printed in clean black ink. By the time Marge pulled into her driveway, the streetlights on Larchmont Avenue had blinked on, casting soft halos over the quiet, tree-lined block. Her brick home, dark against the purple Kansas City dusk, stood as solid and unmovable as ever, the kind of house that remembered things, even when people didn't. She parked carefully, angling the car just right so the nose didn't jut over the sidewalk. A habit. One of many. The porch light flicked on automatically as she stepped out, the sensor catching her movement like an old friend reaching to greet her. Inside, the familiar creak of the hardwood beneath her shoes welcomed her. The thermostat clicked once, then twice, as the heating system adjusted to the October chill that had settled in her bones. She didn't remove her coat. Instead, she moved straight down the hall to the room that once served as a guest bedroom, now converted into what she called her quiet office. No computer, no blinking routers, just a soft lamp in the corner, a sturdy desk with brass pulls, and a 4-drawer file cabinet she'd kept locked for 27 years. She knelt down, pulling her keyring from her purse with steady hands. The lock turned with a soft clack. The second drawer. That's where she'd kept them, wrapped in a manila folder bound with a burgundy ribbon. Unnecessary, but dignified. She slid the folder out and laid it flat on the desk. The ribbon slipped free. Inside, the deed to the house on Larchmont Avenue. Savings account statements, the most recent dated last month. A certificate of deposit rolled over twice in the last decade. Her name, in plain black letters printed on every document, no Daniel. No Karen, no cosigner, no clause, no loophole. She ran a fingertip over the embossed seal on the deed. The paper had yellowed slightly around the edges, but the ink was sharp, unforgiving. Marjorie A. Benson, sole owner. She exhaled, not a sigh, something deeper. Something that came from the center of her chest and settled in her fingertips. So that was what Daniel thought he'd inherit by default. That was what Karen called, not in any meaningful way. She sat there for a full minute, hands folded as the clock in the hallway ticked toward 10. Then she reached for the rotary-style phone she refused to replace. Ivory plastic, solid as a brick, with the number stickers wearing thin on the dial. She didn't need to look up the number. She hadn't in years. 2 rings. Then a voice. Low, steady, familiar. Walter Pierce speaking. It's me, she said. Marge. A pause. I was just thinking of you. Were you really? I heard about the reunion, he said dryly. I figured there'd be a story or two. She didn't laugh. I need you to come by, or I'll come to you. Doesn't matter which. Walter was silent for a beat. Is this about the house? Marge looked down at the deed again, her name reflecting softly under the lamp's glow. It's about securing what's already mine. Another pause. Then, I'll clear the morning. She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Thank you. Of course. You know where to find me. She hung up the phone gently. Then, with great care, She smoothed each page of the documents flat with the side of her hand, pressed them into place like layers of something sacred. Not because she needed the reassurance, but because it grounded her, made the next step feel less like fury and more like intention. She tucked everything back into the folder, tied the ribbon, and slipped it into her purse. Tomorrow, the world would keep thinking of her as someone quiet, passive, a woman who held her tongue while her son mocked her in public. Let them. Let him. The bell above the cafe door gave a soft chime as Marge stepped inside, brushing the wind from her coat collar. Morning light spilled through the wide front windows, warming the brick walls and catching the soft steam rising off ceramic mugs. The air smelled of cinnamon scones and dark roast, old comfort in a new day. Irene was already there, seated at their usual corner table, her sunglasses perched atop her head like a crown. She was halfway through a crossword, her pen tapping impatiently against the formica. "You're 5 minutes late," Irene said, not looking up. "Don't start," Marge replied, sliding into the chair across from her. "You'll want me to finish before you say anything." Irene folded the paper and pushed it aside. "All right then, spill." Marge removed her gloves, folded them precisely in her lap, and took a breath. "At the reunion, Daniel told everyone I own nothing." Irene blinked. "Once?" Then her mouth flattened into a thin line. "He said that? In front of the whole damn family?" Marge nodded once, slow and measured. Karen laughed. "Said I don't own anything in a meaningful way." The pen in Irene's hand snapped against the table. "I swear, that woman thinks Target is a status symbol." Marge didn't smile. "He also said I'm just holding the house for him." Irene's hand curled around her coffee cup like she was trying to keep from throwing it. "Show them all," she muttered. Then louder, slamming her cup down hard enough to make heads turn. "You hear me? Show every last smug face exactly who they're dealing with." A few patrons glanced over, startled. One barista paused mid-pour. Marge raised a hand in apology. "She's fine," she said. "Just spirited." Irene leaned in, voice low and sharp. "You are not a placeholder. You are not a stepping stone. You built that house brick by brick after Harold died, and he knows it." "I know," Marge said softly, wrapping her fingers around her untouched mug. "But I need to do more than know it." Irene's eyes narrowed with satisfaction. "So you're really doing this?" "I've already started," Marge said. "Last night." The buzz of conversation resumed around them, but at that table, the air between the two women was still, settled, like a decision had been made and sealed tight. Irene picked up her cup again. "Good. About time someone made that boy taste his own entitlement." Marge's phone buzzed once in her coat pocket. She slipped it out and glanced at the screen. A text. "Daniel. Don't forget, the house will be mine someday. Sooner than later, if you're smart." Her jaw clenched. She didn't reply, didn't even blink. Just opened the message, then pressed and held her finger over it until the option appeared. "Delete conversation." She tapped it. Gone. Irene saw the motion. "Him?" Marge nodded. "Still trying to remind me of my expiration date." "He's in for one hell of a surprise," Irene said. Marge stirred her coffee slowly. "I want this handled clean, quiet, if possible." Irene raised an eyebrow. "So you're going for surgical, not theatrical?" "For now." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that only years of friendship could make comfortable. "You know," Irene said finally, "there's something poetic about him walking straight into the wall he built himself." Marge allowed a small smile. "He won't see it coming." Outside the window, a delivery truck rolled by, its reflection flickering across their faces. The old elevator rattled as it climbed toward the 6th floor. its bronze doors etched with faint scratch marks from decades of briefcases, umbrellas, and impatient fingernails. Marge stood still, purse clutched in front of her, her reflection fragmented in the warped metal. The folder inside her bag felt heavier than paper, more like memory, or proof, or maybe ammunition. When the doors creaked open, the quiet of the hallway was almost church-like. A fresh pot of coffee gurgled somewhere behind the frosted glass of Pearson Lamb Real Estate Law. The nameplate on the door hadn't changed in 20 years, but the air inside still smelled faintly of lemon polish and copier toner. Walter was waiting. He stood from behind his oak desk when he saw her, buttoning his blazer in that practiced way of men who'd learned manners before technology. "Marge," he said with a nod, "come in." "I hope I'm not keeping you from anything," she said, walking in and setting her purse gently on the client chair's arm. "Just kept a window open in case you called, and you did." He gestured for her to sit. "I figured this was more than a check-in." She nodded, removing the folder with both hands like it was something sacred. "I'd like to make some changes. Quiet ones." He took the folder, adjusted his glasses, and opened it carefully. For a few minutes, only the soft shuffle of papers could be heard, the methodical kind, like someone flipping through pages of a book they already knew the ending to, but were double-checking just the same. "Your deed is clean," he said finally. "No liens, no co-owners. You've done well keeping everything separate." "I had to," she replied. "Harold never believed in joint anything, except church donations." Walter smiled faintly, but his eyes were focused. "This is the part where I ask what, exactly, you want protected." "All of it," Marge said. "The house, the savings, the CDs. And I want Daniel's name nowhere near any of it." Walter leaned back, tapping the end of his pen against his lower lip. "A living trust would do that. Quietly. It avoids probate. Keeps things off public record unless contested. Which I doubt he'd have standing to do." "He'll try," Marge said flatly. "Not because he can, because he assumes." Walter nodded once. "We'll make it watertight." He stood and crossed to a locked cabinet behind his desk. From it, he retrieved a slim stack of fresh forms and a gold-embossed binder labeled Family Trust Documents. He flipped to the first page and began filling in the header fields with calm, practiced motions. Marge sat perfectly still, not anxious, not uncertain, just sure. 10 minutes later, he handed her the pen. "Right here. This makes you sole trustee. You decide where it goes, when it goes, and who never gets near it." She took the pen, breathed once, in and out, and signed her name with careful strokes. Not rushed, not hesitant. Walter smiled slightly. "It's official." There was a knock at the door. Lydia Ross stepped in, petite, steel-haired, a no-nonsense woman in a teal cardigan who'd worked for Walter longer than most of his clients had been alive. "You said you needed a notary?" "I did," Walter said. "Marge, you remember Lydia?" Marge stood to greet her. "From the Rotary meetings, and the bake sale committee." "I remember your apple crumble," Lydia said, flipping her notary book open and smiling as she pulled out her seal. "Still talk about it at the senior center." Marge handed over the freshly signed documents. Lydia read each page carefully before stamping them one by one with the kind of certainty only a lifelong bureaucrat could carry. Clunk, clunk, clunk. Each seal was a sound of finality. When it was done, Lydia gave a brisk nod and slipped out without fanfare. Walter slid the documents into a protective cover and handed them back to Marge. "Now it's just yours," he said, "and it stays that way until you say otherwise." Marge's fingers brushed over the raised stamp on the last page. She didn't smile, but the corners of her mouth curved slightly, like she was absorbing the warmth of something she'd waited a long time to feel. Control, not revenge, not yet. Just ownership. Her chest rose with a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since that day at the banquet hall. She stood slowly, smoothing the front of her coat. "Thank you, Walter." "Any time," he said, standing with her. "You sure you don't want me to make a formal notice to the family?" She shook her head. "Not yet. Let them keep assuming." She turned to leave, purse tucked securely under her arm. Sunday dinner smelled like rosemary chicken and passive aggression. The dining room table was dressed in Marge's best linen, ivory with pale green threading, a holdover from her wedding registry half a century ago. The china was out too, though slightly chipped. Everything in that house had earned its wear. Daniel hadn't noticed. He never did. He sat at the head of the table like he owned it, his voice already a few decibels too loud as he launched into another story about the market, mortgage rates, and how hard it is for people our age to build equity these days. Marge passed the mashed potatoes to Karen, who barely looked up from her phone. "I keep telling Daniel," Karen said, stabbing a piece of asparagus. "Once we remodel the upstairs bath, the resale value will double. Triple, maybe." "Gutting it's the first thing we're doing," Daniel added, grinning wide as he speared a drumstick. "All that tile looks like it was installed during the Truman administration." Irene coughed once, a sound that was suspiciously close to a laugh, and reached for her wine. Across from her, Marge poured herself a glass of water, slow and even. Her fingers were steady, her posture regal. "The house has held up well," she said softly. "Better than most." Daniel waved his fork through the air like a baton. "That's because it's a Benson house. Solid bones, solid foundation. I mean, once it's officially mine, we'll update the facade. Get rid of those shutters. Maybe add a porch swing." Marge's hand moved to her lap. A casual gesture. Deliberate. She patted the side of her purse once, like she was checking for something she already knew was there. Inside, beneath her compact mirror and her folded church bulletin, was the legal trust binder Walter had given her. The one with her name stamped in gold. The deed was there, too, neatly tucked between the pages. Karen, oblivious, poured herself more wine. "We'll open up the kitchen wall, too. Blow out that closed-in feel." "You'd be amazed what a little money and taste can do," Daniel added. "The place has potential. Just needs a new vision." Irene leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine. "And this new vision, does it come before or after your name's on the mortgage?" Daniel looked at her, smirking. "It's a formality. We all know where it's headed." Marge sliced a piece of chicken, slowly. "Do we?" Daniel didn't catch the edge in her tone. He never caught much when he was too busy listening to himself speak. Across the table, Karen took another photo of the food, no doubt for a post captioned "Sunday Family Vibes" or "Future Homeowners in Action." "I have to say," Karen said, lifting her phone again, "it feels good knowing we'll be raising our kids in the same house Daniel grew up in." "We don't have kids," Irene said. Karen blinked. "Yet." Irene took a sip and muttered, "Let's hope they come with sense." Marge set down her knife and folded her hands. She looked at her son, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time not as a boy, or a mistake, or even a disappointment, but as a man already buried under his own delusions. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She slid it out beneath the tablecloth and glanced at the screen. Walter Pierce. All secured. The trust is finalized. No contest possible. Just breathe. Marge's lips pressed together. Not a smile. Not quite. But something near it. She reached for the bread basket and passed it down without a word. Daniel tore into a slice. "Once I get the keys," he said through a mouthful. "First thing I'm doing is replacing this table. It creaks." Marge looked down at the wood, her fingers trailing the grooves worn into its surface from 50 years of life. She said nothing, just watched. Late Monday afternoon, Marge stood at the front window, her palm resting lightly against the glass, watching the golden light stretch long across her front lawn. The shadows from the maple tree danced across the bricks Harold had laid by hand the summer of '78. She could still remember the way his shirt stuck to his back, the way he swore every time the level didn't read perfectly. The house stood the same now as it did then. Proud, worn, entirely hers. From the bay window she could see her trimmed hedges, the iron mailbox with a bent corner from last winter's storm, and the slight slope in the driveway that every delivery driver underestimated. Nothing had changed. That was the power of knowing something was yours, really yours. Not just in name, but in paper, ink, and law. A car door slammed down the street. Marge didn't flinch. She turned back into the living room, where the hardwood floor creaked softly beneath her slippers. The air held the lingering scent of cinnamon from a batch of cookies she'd baked earlier, the kind Irene liked best. Right on cue, the doorbell rang. Irene stood on the porch, holding a glass pie dish covered in foil. "It's cherry," she said, walking in without waiting. "You like cherry. Or at least you pretend to when I make it." "It's better than fine," Marge said, taking the dish with a smirk. "You used almond in the crust again." "You noticed," Irene replied, kicking off her shoes. "That's why I like you better than half your family." They sat at the small kitchen table, the late sunlight turning everything amber. Marge placed 2 dessert plates down and began cutting slices. Irene took hers without asking for whipped cream. She knew Marge didn't stock it. "I saw Karen at the pharmacy yesterday," Irene said through a mouthful. "Buying vitamin gummies like they cure entitlement." Marge let out a soft sound, something between a laugh and a sigh. She said something about listing agents and interior paint colors, like she's flipping your home on a damn HGTV special. Marge poured herself a cup of tea and stirred it slowly. "They'll run out of steam once the air gets cold." Irene raised a brow. "You really think Daniel gives up that easy?" Marge didn't answer. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't move. "I'll get it," Irene said, standing. She picked it up and squinted at the screen. "Voicemail from your boy." "Of course it is." "You want me to play it?" Marge shook her head. "Just hand it here." She tapped the screen, listening without putting it on speaker. Daniel's voice slithered through the earpiece, smooth and self-satisfied. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Again. Thought I'd suggest something. You might want to consider downsizing soon, before winter hits. That house is a lot to manage, for someone your age. Just a thought. Especially with, you know, me taking over eventually. No rush or anything, but it'd make things easier for everyone. Delete. No hesitation, no anger, just a tap, and gone." She set the phone down and lifted her teacup. "Let me guess," Irene said, biting into her crust. "He's concerned for your well-being, just before trying to push you off the edge." Marge smiled softly. "He'll get tired of hearing his own voice eventually." "Will he?" Irene asked. "No," Marge admitted, "but I won't be listening." Later that evening, after Irene had gone and the sun had tucked itself behind the rooftops, Marge unfolded her quilting hoop and settled into her armchair by the window. She hummed softly, a tune with no name, while her needle rose and fell through the fabric, each stitch neat, intentional. The kind of rhythm you could only keep when your mind was clear. A knock came at the door. Marge paused mid-stitch, not startled, just alert. She glanced at the clock. 7:42 p.m., too early for trouble, too late for courtesy. She set the hoop down and stood, smoothing her cardigan as she moved toward the entryway. The manila envelope sat untouched on the kitchen counter for 2 full days. Marge hadn't opened it, not because she was afraid, but because she already knew what it was trying to do. rattle her. And Marjorie Benson didn't rattle, not anymore. Instead, she did what she'd always done when the world got too noisy. She baked. By 8 a.m., Thursday morning, the house smelled like browned butter and vanilla extract. A cooling rack lined the stovetop, each wire rung filled with golden snickerdoodles, oatmeal raisin, and her signature molasses crinkles. The radio hummed softly from the windowsill. Old jazz, mostly instrumental. Just enough to cover the faint ping of her phone, lighting up again and again on the counter beside the sealed envelope. Curious, finally, she slid off her oven mitt and reached for it. The screen was filled with notifications from the family group thread. Cousins, a niece in Denver. Even Robbie, sweet, quiet Robbie, had chimed in. Karen just posted this. Is it true? Wow. New owners already? Wait, is Daniel really selling the house? Marge's eyes narrowed. She opened Facebook. Karen's latest post sat at the top of the feed like a neon sign, wrapped in faux humility and filtered lighting. Karen Benson. Just toured a few design studios today for our renovation plans. So excited to give Daniel's childhood home the love and updates it deserves. Can't wait to knock down that old kitchen wall and make space for our dream open concept layout. Modern farmhouse, sans future homeowners, car generational wealth. Attached was a photo of Karen, manicured, smug, standing outside Marge's front porch, smiling wide next to a whiteboard mock-up of a before and after floor plan. Daniel stood behind her, pointing at the house like he'd just bought it on auction. Marge stared at it for a long moment, then took a slow sip from her tea. Bless her heart, she said softly, setting the mug down. She didn't reply to the group thread. Instead, she tapped out a private message to Robbie. Marge, we'll see. That was enough. A minute later, Irene called. No hello. Please tell me you've seen the circus Karen's running online. I have. She tagged Crate and Barrel, Marge. She's already claiming the sunroom's hers. I noticed. She said something about removing the chimney, too, as if the fireplace didn't hold every holiday memory they ever had. Marge lifted another tray of cookies from the oven. They never did like the brickwork. You're being awfully calm. That's because the deed says they don't matter. Irene exhaled. I swear, the only reason I'm not calling every last cousin to set the record straight is because I know you've got something cooking that's better than the truth. I do, Marge said simply. It's baking at 325. Irene snorted. Let them brag. The higher they climb, the funnier the fall. They hung up with nothing more than a shared chuckle and the promise of brunch next week. Marge turned back to her cookies. The house was quiet again, except for the ping of her inbox. From Walter Pierce. Subject, trust confirmation and deed filing copies attached. Everything's secure. The county filing is complete, and certified copies are en route. Nothing they say changes what's legally locked down. Call me if you need anything else. W. Marge saved the PDF to her desktop without opening it. She didn't need to read it. She knew every line. Outside, a squirrel ran along the porch railing, oblivious to inheritance claims and Instagram hashtags. The leaves were turning now, rich amber, deep rust, just the way she liked October best. Her phone buzzed again. Another post. Karen, this time in the kitchen, holding up swatches of sage green paint. Marge smiled faintly and kept rolling her dough. Let them plan. Let them measure and imagine and decorate. Because they weren't building a dream. They were sketching blueprints inside someone else's locked vault. The knock came at 3:10 p.m. Exactly when Marge least expected it. No call, no text, just two sharp raps on the front door followed by the creak of the storm screen opening, uninvited. She didn't need to look through the peephole. She already knew. Marge moved calmly, wiping her hands on a towel and turning off the kettle just before it whistled. The scent of lemon balm still lingered in the air. She'd been steeping it since morning, waiting for a moment of peace. Instead, she opened the door to Daniel and Karen. "Hey, Mom!" Daniel grinned like he was announcing himself to a camera crew. "Didn't think you'd be home?" "I live here," Marge replied simply, stepping aside. Karen breezed in behind him without waiting for an invitation, oversized sunglasses perched in her hair and a large designer tote on her arm. "Wow, this place really hasn't changed. I mean, classic, of course, but—" She let her sentence trail off into judgment. Marge shut the door behind them. Quiet click. No slam. Just boundaries. Daniel took his usual stance, center of the room, hands on hips, surveying it like a realtor preparing for a walkthrough. "Still smells the same in here. Kinda cinnamony, huh?" "I baked," Marge said. "Would you like some tea?" He blinked. Sure." Karen made a noise like she wanted to protest, but thought better of it. She followed Marge into the kitchen, setting her tote loudly on the counter like she owned it. Marge moved with quiet purpose, pulling down 3 mugs, setting out the sugar, honey, and milk, without asking anyone how they took it. She knew. She always had. "So," Daniel said, flopping into the breakfast nook chair like it had been waiting for him since childhood. "Karen and I were just driving around, talking about design plans. Thought we'd swing by. You know, while it's still yours." Karen gave a soft laugh, brushing imaginary dust off the seat before sitting. "He means, before you decide to move someplace easier. For your age." Daniel thinks ahead like that. Marge poured the tea, 1 mug at a time. Karen reached into her tote and pulled out a tablet. "I brought a mock-up. We talked to an architect last week. You should see what we can do with the front room if we knock out that east-facing wall." Daniel leaned in, grinning. "Don't break anything," he joked. "It'll be mine soon enough." Marge set the teapot down, reached into the side drawer, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. No fuss, no preamble. Just the sound of zipper teeth separating. She slid the folder across the table with both hands. "Read that first," she said. Daniel's smile flickered. "What is this?" Karen's hand hovered over the tablet. "Some kind of scrapbook?" Marge didn't speak. She simply sipped her tea and watched. Daniel unzipped the folder and pulled out the top page. Legal formatting. Gold notary seal. Pearson Lamb. Real estate law stamped across the header. Karen leaned closer. Her mouth opened, then closed. The second document came out. The deed. The official one, stamped, certified, naming Marjorie A. Benson as the sole owner and trustee of the property, with no succession clauses and no designated beneficiaries. Karen's eyes darted from line to line, her hand lowering slowly from the tablet screen. Daniel's throat bobbed once as he swallowed. "Wait. What is this?" Marge set her cup down gently. "That's the only blueprint that matters." Karen blinked rapidly. "But you said you hadn't finalized anything yet. You said it wasn't time." "I didn't say that," Marge corrected, her tone even. "You just weren't listening." Silence fell over the kitchen like a dropped curtain. Daniel stared at the pages as if they were written in another language, one he never bothered to learn. Karen, pale now, slowly zipped the folder closed but left it on the table, as though touching it too long might burn her. Daniel's face twitched, not quite a wince, not quite a smile. Just a flicker of recognition that the room had tilted in a direction he didn't control. "You can't block me out," he said, voice too loud for the small kitchen. "Legally, you can't just shut me out like this." Marge didn't flinch. She reached calmly into the folder and slid out the notarized trust papers. Her fingers moved with deliberate precision as she laid them across the table, one by one, like cards in a winning hand. "Here's the trust," she said. "Filed, stamped, irrevocable." Daniel leaned forward, scanning the lines, but the words meant nothing to him. Latin phrases, state statutes, long paragraphs written in a language designed to be permanent. Karen squinted, brow furrowed. You signed this already?" Marge tilted her head. 2 weeks ago, right after the reunion." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her tongue pressed against her cheek, like she wanted to spit but knew better. "You're not serious," Daniel said. "This doesn't mean anything. We're family." Marge folded her hands. "It means everything." He turned to Karen, gesturing at the papers. "This can't be valid. There's no way. She didn't have permission." "She doesn't need permission," Karen snapped, her composure cracking. "It's her house, her assets." "That's what sole ownership means, Daniel." His face flushed red. "She's 70. This should be a joint conversation, a transition, something we work through as a family." "You mean something you manage," Marge said coolly. "Something you inherit." He threw up his hands. "I deserve some say." Irene's voice cut through the room like a whip. "You deserve a muzzle." Daniel spun around. He hadn't noticed her standing in the doorway. She leaned casually against the frame, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised like a woman watching a soap opera she already knew the ending to. "How long have you been there?" Karen asked, blinking. "Long enough," Irene said, stepping into the room. "Long enough to hear this idiot dig himself into a legal grave." Daniel jabbed a finger at the documents. "This doesn't change the fact that I'm her son." "That's right," Marge replied. "And if I ever forget that, I'll look at these papers and remember why I had to sign them." Karen's lip curled. "This is vindictive." "No," Marge said, her voice soft but firm. "This is protective." Daniel scoffed. "This won't hold." "I'll get a lawyer." "Then get a good one," Marge replied, her tone even, "and tell him to read paragraph 6. That's where it states that any contest of the trust triggers an automatic removal from any future distribution. No inheritance, no recourse." Irene let out a short, sharp laugh. She booby-trapped it. Karen turned to Daniel. "You said she hadn't done anything yet." "She hadn't," he snapped. "I thought—" "You didn't think," Marge said, rising slowly to her feet. "You assumed? Like you always do." Karen opened her mouth to speak but caught Irene's glare and thought better of it. Daniel's breath came shorter now, his pride bruised, his plans crumbling in real time. "You'd really cut me out of everything?" Marge stepped closer, not aggressive, just final. "I didn't cut you out," she said. "You never built yourself in." He looked at her, not as a son looks at a mother, but as a man realizes the door he expected to walk through has already been locked, welded and bricked shut from the inside. And behind that wall, a woman stood, who didn't owe him an ounce of explanation. Without another word, Daniel pushed his chair back hard enough to make it screech across the floor. He stormed toward the door, muttering curses under his breath. Karen stayed frozen for a beat, eyes flicking between Marge and the documents like she was still calculating odds in a game already lost. "I'd take that tablet with you," Irene said, nodding toward the counter. "No reason to leave your fake house plans behind." Karen snatched it and followed Daniel out, the screen doors slamming hard behind them. Silence filled the kitchen. Marge exhaled, slow and steady. 3 days passed. No knocks on the door, no surprise visits, just silence. And for Marge, that was a luxury. Her living room, with its faded floral drapes and hand-stitched cushions, felt quieter than usual, like the walls themselves were relieved. The tension that had haunted the corners, lingering behind every vase and shelf like an uninvited guest, had finally lifted. She sat in her armchair near the window, knitting needles clicking in gentle rhythm. A new scarf was forming, soft gray yarn that matched the October sky. Her feet rested on the ottoman. The fireplace glowed low, casting flickers on the hardwood. Her phone rang once. She didn't rush to answer it. "Walter," she said, picking up on the second ring. "Still enjoying your victory?" he asked, his voice low and wry. "Victory's not the word," Marge replied. "More like restoration." Walter chuckled. "Well, you'll be glad to know I heard from Daniel's attorney this morning." "Oh?" She adjusted a stitch, careful and precise. "It wasn't a real filing," Walter said. "More of a bluff. Some vague language about challenging undue influence and lack of mental clarity. All nonsense. I sent back a copy of your trust and the video from our meeting. That was the end of that." Marge didn't speak for a moment. She just let the warmth of it settle in her chest. "No case?" she said finally. "None. Not even a shaky one." "Good." Walter paused. "You want me to draft a cease and desist in case he starts harassing you?" "No," Marge said. "Let him scream into the void if he wants." Walter hummed in agreement. "You always were the steel behind the curtain." After they hung up, Marge set the phone down gently and returned to her knitting. No rush, no tension, just rows and rows of order. At noon, her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from Facebook. She wasn't the kind to scroll often, but she tapped out of habit and raised an eyebrow. Daniel Benson has posted, "Apparently, family means nothing these days. You work your whole life for respect. And in the end, the people closest to you stab you in the back. Guess I'll be starting over. Thanks for the lesson, Mother." 3 comments in, a distant cousin replied, "Is this about the house?" A second relative chimed in, "Didn't you say you already owned it?" A third, "I thought she let you move in?" Marge set the phone face down. From the couch, Irene gave a theatrical groan. "He's still at it?" "He's allergic to embarrassment," Marge said, continuing her stitching. "He's not embarrassed," Irene said, sipping her coffee. "He's just stunned that the world doesn't orbit his ego." Marge smiled faintly. "What was it today?" Irene asked. "Another passive-aggressive quote about loyalty? Or one of those vague posts with a black background and white letters like he's starting a punk band?" Marge laughed, an honest, short burst of air. "White letters on black." Irene snapped her fingers. Bingo, the classic pity post. "Ignore him," Marge said. "It costs nothing." "I'd pay money to ignore him harder," Irene muttered. "That boy thinks Facebook is a courtroom and emojis are evidence." Marge held up the scarf, appraising her work. "He'll wear himself out eventually." From the side table, her laptop dinged. An email. She opened it slowly, wiping her fingers on her lap before touching the keys. From Walter Pierce. Subject: Confirmation. All final Marge, all deed filings, trust registrations, and county records have been logged and cross-referenced. There is nothing Daniel can do without triggering the forfeiture clause. You're fully protected. No further action needed. Warmly, Walter Marge closed the laptop. Irene leaned back, crossing her legs. "So what's next? Florida? Cruise ship? Run for mayor?" Marge chuckled. "No, just dinner. Maybe a movie." Irene grinned. "And the will?" "Already started," Marge said. "I'm just deciding what not to leave him." From the kitchen came the soft ding of the oven timer. Marge stood and stretched, her knees stiff but her spirit light. She pulled out a tray of cornbread, steam rising in curls, buttery and golden. Comfort food for a woman who had finally reclaimed her peace. She plated 2 squares and brought them over. "I still think you should frame that trust document," Irene said, biting in. Marge smiled. It's framed already, just not in a way he'll ever see. It was a Saturday morning, bright but bitter. The kind of cold that made car doors stick and old wood creak. Marge had just finished folding the last of her laundry, dish towels and a wool cardigan, when she heard the scrape of tires on her driveway. Not a neighbor. Not the mailman. Something heavier. She stepped quietly to the front window and peeked through the curtains. There he was. Daniel, dragging two overstuffed boxes out of the back seat of his car like a man coming home. Except he wasn't. He slammed the trunk shut, adjusted his hoodie, and started up the walk without looking at the house, as if the house owed him the courtesy of not being surprised. Behind him, Karen stood by the car in leggings and a smug grin, scrolling her phone while a potted snake plant teetered precariously in her hands. Marge moved to the front door. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. By the time Daniel reached the porch, she was already standing in the doorway, calm, centered, unmoved. "Morning," she said evenly. Daniel's smile was too wide. "Didn't think you'd be up this early?" "It's 10:30. "I brought a few things," he said, hefting one box higher. "Figured I'd start moving in. Makes sense now that everything's out in the open, right?" Marge didn't blink. "Nothing's changed." He gestured with his elbow behind him. "We need a place for the winter. And since you've made your stance about the will so clear, I figured we'd start the transition." She took one small step forward and didn't move an inch aside. "You're not moving in," she said. He blinked, laughed, like she was the one being absurd. "Come on, Mom, let's not make this a thing." "It already is," she said. "And it's not your house." Daniel set the box down hard enough to thud against the porch railing. "You're seriously going to pull this in front of the neighbors?" As if on cue, Mrs. Delgado from next door peeked through her blinds. Across the street, Mr. Howard paused mid-leaf raking. "I'm not pulling anything," Marge said. "You're the one showing up unannounced with moving boxes and a fern." Karen rolled her eyes behind him. "It's a snake plant." "I'm aware," Marge said. Daniel stepped closer. "You're not thinking clearly. This whole thing with the trust has been filed," Marge said. "Stamped, recorded, and legally binding." "Yeah, well, maybe I don't care what a piece of paper says," he snapped. "I do," Marge said. "And so does the law." From the sidewalk, Irene's voice floated up, dry and amused. "Say cheese." Daniel turned fast. Irene stood halfway behind the maple tree, phone raised, camera rolling. "Just documenting the beginning of this comedy special in case it ends in court." "You're enjoying this," Daniel growled. "Oh, immensely," Irene replied. "But don't let me interrupt. You were just about to get arrested for trespassing, weren't you?" Karen turned a shade paler. "Dan, maybe we should—" "No," he snapped. "This is my house. She can't just erase me." A black and white cruiser turned slowly onto the street, headlights flicking in the morning glare. Someone had called. Maybe Irene, maybe the neighbors, maybe the universe. The officer stepped out. Young, calm, badge gleaming. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, approaching the porch. Daniel straightened. "This is my mother's house. I was just—" Marge held up a document sleeve. Deed, trust, notarizations visible through the plastic. "This is my property," she said. "These people were not invited." The officer looked at the papers, scanned them carefully, then turned to Daniel. "Sir, unless you're on this title, she has the legal right to deny entry. You'll need to leave." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Are you serious?" The officer didn't answer. He simply waited. Karen backed away first, arms crossed over her chest like armor. "Let's go," she muttered. Daniel hesitated, then grabbed his box, walking back toward the car like it weighed twice as much. Marge remained on the porch, arms crossed, spine straight. The same woman who raised a son and buried a husband and kept every receipt in labeled folders. She didn't wave. She didn't flinch. She just watched as her past tried to retreat and failed to make it look like anything else. The air in Walter Pierce's office was warm, laced with the scent of dark coffee and lemon oil, like always. The sun filtered through the tall blinds, casting long bars of light across the heavy oak desk. Marge sat in her usual chair, straight-backed, hands folded, wearing her navy wool coat and a red scarf that matched the slight flush in her cheeks. Across from her, Walter shuffled a fresh stack of legal documents, the corner of his reading glasses resting against his temple. Calm, methodical. He didn't rush. He never did. "I took the liberty of drafting what we discussed," he said, sliding the top page toward her. "You've already locked him out of the house and assets. This makes it final across the board." Marge adjusted her glasses. "Read every word." The line with Daniel's name, once listed as primary beneficiary, had been cleanly struck. Below it, a new section read, "Final designation of remaining estate. To be distributed in full to the Grace Memorial Church Scholarship Fund for Underserved Youth, Kansas City, MO." Marge exhaled slowly. "He said I was just holding it for him." Walter leaned back in his chair. "Now you're passing it to someone who'll actually do something with it." The door opened with a soft click, and Irene stepped in wearing a dark pea coat, her reading glasses already in hand. "You didn't think I'd miss this part, did you?" Marge smiled. "You're here to witness, not celebrate." "I can multitask," Irene said, plopping down beside her. Walter passed a pen across the desk. "Just your signature here, Marge. Then I'll notarize. Once this is filed, there's no coming back from it." "I don't want to come back," she said. "I'm not leaving room for second chances." She signed. No hesitation. Walter nodded, stamped the documents, and turned to Irene. "And now you." Irene signed with a dramatic flourish, then handed the pen back. "There. Official. The boy's got less claim to you now than the guy who trims your hedges." Walter tucked the documents into a filing folder and sealed it with a gold sticker. "I'll have the new will recorded this afternoon. You'll get certified copies by next week." "Thank you," Marge said, rising from her seat with that same quiet grace she always carried, like nothing could shake her center anymore. Walter stood with her. "You did the hard part, Marge. This is just the paperwork." "No," she said gently. "This is the future. The part he never planned for because he assumed I'd never plan at all." They shook hands. Firmly, respectfully. Outside, the wind had picked up, blowing leaves across the courthouse parking lot like confetti. A celebration nature hadn't been invited to, but attended anyway. Marge and Irene walked slowly to the car. "You sure you're okay?" Irene asked, unlocking the passenger door. "This was final." "That's the point," Marge said. "Now he can spend the rest of his life figuring out how I did it without ever raising my voice." They drove in companionable silence for a while, the city rolling by in golden tones, mid-autumn crisp against storefront windows and chimney smoke. At a red light, Irene glanced over. "So why the scholarship fund?" "Because the kids who get those scholarships don't expect anything. They work for it. They fight for it. They'll use it." Marge looked ahead, calm. Daniel would have sold the house for countertops. Irene chuckled. "He did have a Pinterest board named My Future Kitchen." "Of course he did." They turned onto Larchmont Avenue. Marge's house came into view. Warm brick, maple leaves clustered on the porch, her quilted fall wreath still pinned proudly to the door. As they pulled into the driveway, Irene asked, "You gonna tell him?" Marge unbuckled her seatbelt slowly. "Eventually." "Want me to leak it?" Irene smirked. "I could pretend to accidentally post a photo of the paperwork on the family thread." Marge shook her head. "No need." She stepped out of the car, lifted her face to the wind, and smiled. Real, full, unburdened. It started as a whisper at the church potluck. Marge was spooning macaroni salad onto her plate when she overheard two ladies near the lemonade station, whispered words behind styrofoam cups and napkins. Moved out last week, one said. Near 39th Street, the other added. Above that closed-down shoe store, studio apartment, no elevator. Marge didn't react. Just stirred the salad a little more than necessary and moved down the line. By Sunday afternoon, it had made its way to Irene, who, of course, called before Marge had even taken off her church shoes. "Guess who's gone condo?" Irene said gleefully. And not the high-rise kind. One room. Paper-thin walls. Landlord named Chuck. Marge didn't respond at first. She was pouring herself a glass of iced tea and watching a goldfinch land on the edge of the bird bath outside. "You there?" Irene pressed. "I am," Marge said quietly. "I just don't celebrate someone's consequences. I live with them." "That might be the most dignified thing anyone said since the Gettysburg Address," Irene muttered. Daniel's move wasn't formally announced, but it didn't need to be. Karen's absence from every family function since Halloween had spoken louder than words. No posts, no invites, no photos of wine glasses captioned "Cozy Nights in Our Forever Home." Gone. Just like that. Marge didn't ask where she'd gone. She didn't care. Some questions weren't worth the breath it took to ask. What did matter? What landed deeper than gossip or Facebook fallout? Was what arrived in Marge's mailbox that Thursday. It was a small cream envelope, hand-addressed. The return label read, "Grace Memorial Church Scholarship Committee." Marge opened it at the kitchen table with her letter opener, the same one Harold had used to slice open utility bills and birthday cards for 30 years. Inside was a note on thick stationery and a photo of 3 high school seniors standing in front of the church altar, grinning ear to ear in graduation robes. "Dear Mrs. Benson, on behalf of the Grace Memorial Scholarship Fund, we thank you for your generous contribution. Because of you, 3 Kansas City students will be the first in their families to attend college this fall. They've already begun writing their own futures. With sincere gratitude, the Grace Memorial Scholarship Committee." Marge traced the edges of the card, then looked again at the photo. 3 kids. Clean slates. Unaware that their lives had been quietly rewritten by a woman they'd never meet. She set the card gently on her mantel. The next morning, she planted tulip bulbs in the front yard. It had rained the night before, softening the soil. Her knees ached, but she didn't rush. She dug in slow, precise rows, red, yellow, white, placing each bulb gently like she was tucking in a child for a long winter nap. Across the street, Mr. Howard waved from his porch. "Those'll be a sight come spring," he said. "I hope so," Marge replied. "Everything deserves a season to bloom." By the time she finished, dirt smudged her gloves and the sun was beginning its slow descent behind the chimney. She stood up, brushing off her apron, and leaned on the shovel for a moment, breathing in the earthy, clean scent of autumn settling into the roots. That weekend, she and Irene met for brunch at the little cafe on Summit Avenue, the one with cracked tile floors and mismatched mugs. Irene raised her orange juice and tapped Marge's glass with hers. "To clean exits," she said, "and to staying on your own damn deed." Marge smiled. "And to not explaining it to anyone who didn't ask nicely." "Exactly," Irene said, grinning. "And if anyone does ask, I'll show them a copy of the will. I made 5. They laughed, real laughter, the kind that came from a belly that knew what it felt like to be tight with tension and was grateful to be loose again. Later that night, Marge sat by her window, wrapped in a soft blanket, humming quietly as she turned the pages of a seed catalog, already thinking about what came after tulips. The news broke on a Tuesday. Marge had just sat down in her sunroom, her legs tucked beneath her on the cushioned rattan bench, when her phone lit up with a call from Robbie, the kind of nephew who never stirred drama unless it already boiled over. "You haven't heard?" he said, sounding half shocked, half apologetic. Daniel filed. Bankruptcy. Chapter 13. Marge blinked once. "I see." "Karen left," Robbie added, like a man unloading facts he wished weren't true. "She's in Arizona now. Scottsdale. Some tech guy she met on one of those networking retreats." Marge looked out at her tulip beds. Green shoots had begun to break the surface. Small, determined things, stretching toward the light. She felt something stir behind her ribs. Not glee, not sorrow, just confirmation. The past had taken root in bad soil. And now it was collapsing in on itself. "Thanks for calling," she told Robbie. "Drive safe." When she hung up, the sun shifted through the blinds and drew soft golden stripes across her lap. She picked up her knitting again. A baby blanket this time, soft yellow. No one had asked for it, but she wanted to make it anyway. There were still things worth building, even quietly. A knock came at the back door. Irene stepped in without waiting, holding a basket wrapped in a gingham towel. "Warm muffins," she announced. "And warm gossip." Marge raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess." "Oh no," Irene said, placing the basket on the counter. "You don't get to guess. You get to sit while I tell you what the universe did." Marge leaned back into her chair. "Daniel declared bankruptcy yesterday. And get this. His car was repoed while he was meeting with his lawyer." He walked out to an empty parking spot. "Poetic, isn't it?" Marge didn't flinch. "Cars are just metal and money." "Sure," Irene agreed. "But pride? Now that's irreplaceable." "And Karen?" Marge asked, though she already knew. "Gone. Moved out of state. Deleted every photo of him from social media, like she's in the witness protection program for bad husbands." They sat in comfortable silence while the muffins cooled and the afternoon light rolled slowly across the floor. "I got another letter," Marge said, gesturing toward the end table. Irene picked up the envelope. The same logo from before. Grace Memorial Church Scholarship Fund. This time it came with a photo. 3 new students. Smiling faces. A quote printed beneath them. "Because of your gift. I'm not just dreaming about college anymore. I'm packing for it." Irene handed the letter back. Softer now. "You did that?" "No," Marge said. "They did that. I just moved the roadblocks." Later that day, Walter called. "Just checking in," he said. "I heard about Daniel. Thought I'd confirm. Your filings are still airtight. No challenge can touch the trust or the will." "I know," Marge said. "You'd be amazed how many people unravel at this stage. They get vindication and go soft." "I'm not unraveling, Walter. I'm planting." He chuckled. "You always had a better head than half the clients I've seen in this city. But if anything changes—" "It won't," Marge said. "But thank you." After they hung up, she returned to her sunroom. She poured herself a glass of sweet tea, added 2 lemon slices, and sat back down on the rattan bench. She let the sunlight warm her skin, while the muffled sounds of kids playing a few doors down drifted in through the screen. Peace, it turned out, didn't arrive with grand gestures. It arrived with fresh muffins and tulips pushing through the thaw. And just when she thought the day couldn't offer more, just when her chest felt light enough to float, she noticed a small white envelope in her mailbox. No return address, no stamp. Just one word in tight, blocky handwriting: read. The reunion was smaller this year. Fewer cousins, fewer casseroles. The usual folding tables lined the rented community center hall, but the mood was subdued. Less chaos, more caution. Whispers floated between relatives like steam off paper plates, and every few seconds someone's eyes flicked toward the door, because they all knew she was coming. And she wasn't coming alone. At precisely 2 p.m., the double doors opened, and Marjorie Benson stepped inside, flanked by Walter Pierce on one side and Irene on the other. One a manila-clad fortress in a pressed gray suit, the other a steel magnolia in vintage turquoise. Marge walked with purpose, her heels echoing on the linoleum floor, her hair pinned in a tidy chignon, her face calm. Not smug, not showy, just sure. Walter held the black folder in one hand, the same one that had sat quietly in her desk for weeks. The deed, the trust, the filings, all bundled like scripture. "Is that her lawyer?" someone whispered near the dessert table. "Yep," another replied. "That's the guy Daniel said wasn't real." At a table near the back, Daniel sat frozen, a paper plate balanced on his knee, untouched ham sandwich crumbling beneath his thumb. His face flushed pink, then red, then something deeper. Karen wasn't there. No surprise. She hadn't shown her face in months. Marge walked past him without so much as a glance. Irene peeled off to snag 2 lemon bars from the buffet and returned just in time to see Walter step up to the front, tapping a spoon gently against his water glass. The room quieted. "Good afternoon," Walter said. "My name is Walter Pierce, legal counsel for Mrs. Marjorie Benson. I've been asked to speak today on her behalf, briefly, to clarify a few matters that have recently been the subject of speculation." A few cousins shifted uncomfortably. Walter opened the folder. "I hold in my hands the deed to the Benson family home," he said clearly. "Filed, notarized, recorded with the county clerk's office as of October 10th of this year." He held it up, flipping it toward the room like a magician showing a final card. It reads, in full, sole owner, Marjorie A. Benson. No co-signers, no successors, no disputes, just one name. The name they had all once assumed would disappear quietly into paperwork and probate. Marge's name. Daniel stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "This isn't necessary," he snapped. "You're trying to humiliate me." "No," Marge said, turning to face him for the first time. "You did that all on your own. I'm just correcting the record." He stared at her, lips parted, hands twitching at his sides like he wanted to argue, but had run out of excuses that still held weight. Behind her, Irene stood beaming, one lemon bar already half-eaten, the other raised like a tiny powdered trophy. Applause began in the back, Robbie, of course, then grew, rippling through the room like the rustle of wind across a cornfield. Gentle, sincere, final. Marge didn't bow, didn't wave. She simply stepped back beside Walter, took the folder, and held it against her chest like a shield that no longer needed raising. Afterward, she made her rounds. Polite, warm, graceful. She hugged a cousin she hadn't seen in 2 years, thanked Robbie for the peach cobbler, asked a niece about her new baby. When she passed Daniel again, he stood stiffly near the punch bowl, alone. She didn't stop. He didn't speak. He wouldn't. Not now. And she would never need to explain herself to him again. Outside, the sky was impossibly blue, Missouri autumn in its finest dress. And as the crowd trickled out, Irene leaned in with a wink. "I brought back up lemon bars," she whispered. "But they're only for winners." Marge smiled, turning toward the parking lot, keys already in hand. She felt lighter than she had in years, not because she'd won, but because she'd reclaimed what was never his to take. Her name, her house, her dignity.